Planning and budgeting for a home studio with Rob Bailey from Kingston Soundworks.
Well, I was going to introduce myself saying I've been an industry worker in this stuff for over 25 years now. Mostly live sound. I have my own company, but I've done a lot of studio stuff. And man, if I could buy now what I've spent on stuff 15, 20 years ago, I would have a crazy great studio. I do have a crazy great studio, but it's just cost me a lot more money on the way. That's the great thing about getting into it in this day and age, is it's pretty dirt cheap. For what I spent on, a computer and a basic interface 15 years ago, you can buy an entire studio and a mic locker and all that kind of stuff in terms of the gear. But anyway, I thought I would start with planning and budgeting for a home studio. So this sort of looks at the different kinds of studios you can put together, and I find it's an important thing just to sort of figure out the best way of getting from A to B. So you have to know where you want to go. So we've all sort of gone over your ideas of what you're looking to do, and that's going to then sort of subdivide into the ways that you do it, or what you're looking to do. Is this something for fun? Is this something where you want to be semi-professional, or is this the full professional? This is the career I want to choose. So for fun, obviously you can get away with spending the least amount of money and have fun. You don't have to as well spend tons of money to do this stuff. There's a lot of inexpensive gear that sounds really good, and that's why I sort of put it out. This is because I've had a retail store as well, so I've sold a lot of this stuff. I've always put it to the customer as being, where do you want to go in 10 years? There's no point in buying a cheap interface and a cheap mic, and then in a couple of years going, okay, well, I always wanted to do this professionally, so now I'm going to start investing in more expensive things. You can go that way, but you're kind of spending more money along the way, because you're just going to have all your cheaper stuff that you bought to start with, and then you're going to find that, I've got to sell it all for loss of money, or upgrade and get all sorts of new stuff. So that's sort of why I find it's a smart way of putting your studio together, is to sort of have a good goal in mind. Start from one place. Where do I want to go? Is this just going to be for fun? Am I going to do it semi-professionally or fully professionally? And then there's two sort of ways to think about it. You're doing either a pre-production studio or a post-production studio. The pre-production studio is more like Oscar and Tessa there, who are putting an actual recording studio, and yourself for that matter. I would say more of what Douglas and Era are doing. It's still a pre-production studio, but it's more in the lines of post-production, in that you've got a simpler format. You don't need a large space. You don't need to have maybe quite as good acoustics. You can get away with a lot. You can get away with putting it in your closet almost, rather than having to have a large space to let air move around and let instruments breathe, and to have a whole band in your house, or whatever the case may be. So that's sort of the next step in figuring out where you're going to go along with this. Your choices sort of break down into 4 parts. There's the CPU, or the computer. There's your inputs, your interface, and your monitoring. So those are just the general sections that you have to consider in the chain going along there. So that typically doesn't have to be, and we'll get to this a little more in a second there, but a computer is going to be most people's way, and it's probably the way I would recommend, because digital is just so inexpensive, so easy to use, and everybody uses it. You can still add analog character for getting like a higher, for that grand piano. You're going to probably want a nice analog preamp and a nice microphone on that to capture the sound of the thing breathing in a room.
Right.
But going into digital, especially if you want to put it out as an album or something like that. So you have to think about sort of, again, starting at one end and going to the other. You can go all analog as well. That's sort of what I have down in the list a little bit further away, and I'll get in a little more detail in a second. You've got your analog, your digital, or your hybrid setup. So they're just 3 different processing points of how you want to go through this, which will sort of streamline into what you guys have been talking about. But the basics are, you need your recording medium. So typically computer, and that's what I recommend. You need obviously your inputs, which is your microphones, or DI, direct recording stuff. Going into that as well, you're looking at preamp, and then your interface, and then you need 2 lines of monitoring. which is your headphone setup and your speaker setup. Speakers are always preferable. Headphones create an artificial sort of bubble around your head. And we'll go into a little detail about some kinds of headphones you can go with depending on your project type, because for some of your stuff it might work better solely with headphones rather than speakers, because you don't really need the speaker. You're not listening to a kick drum and going like, okay, there's, I can feel the air of that thing moving out and hitting me in the chest, so that sounds good. And I need to carve this EQ out. That's something you can get. For doing like podcasting and voiceover work and interviews, headphones are going to work a lot more efficiently. And as well, as we'll get to in designing of the actual studio itself, is something that you have to think of for overdubbing and for street noise and other things like that, how much external interference you're going to have. But you generally need headphones and speakers to ultimately put it together. So again, all this that I'm just going to quickly go through here is just sort of the chain of things that you should think about if you're going to start investing money. Some people might think, oh, I just need an interface, a mic, and that, and then they forget that they need headphones. The biggest one is this one, accessories. Everyone gets a microphone and an interface and whatever. They forget about power, cables, and mic stands. So those accessories, when you're budgeting, save 20% of your budget that you come up with as something for adding that into, because a mic stand's going to cost you $50. Good quality cables, which I always recommend. You can buy cheap cables for $20, say, for a mic cable. Spend $35-40 on a really good one. It will never break, and it will work forever and ever. It's just a worthwhile investment right off the bat. And the same thing for power. If you're going to have lots of outboard gear, if you're going to have whatever, you've got to have good quality power. You want to probably consider UPS, an uninterruptible power supply, so that if you're in the middle of recording something really important, you've got a great take of somebody on the piano, and all of a sudden you get a power outage in your building, you're going to either lose that all recording to a computer instantly when your power goes down, or if you have a UPS for it, you've got a short window that you can hopefully carry through a take, shut everything down and save it and move along. So those are just little things that are always good to consider when putting that together. Okay, then into the DAW is your digital audio workstation. If you don't know the terminology, there's three sort of, again, this all kind of greatly ties together with some of the things. You've got your analog, your digital, or your hybrid. So if you're going all analog, which some people prefer, you can get a nice tape machine like this guy sitting over here. You can do multi-track and bouncing over there if that's the sound you're looking for. Again, I always typically, well actually what I would really, if you're going serious into it, I would, for music, say look at a hybrid flow. So you want an interface that's going to have ins and outs on it, so that you can send your drum bus or whatever it is into a nice old vintage preamp, into a nice compressor, into a nice EQ, and create that $1 million studio with that big Neve console that costs hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that sound that it creates, you can add that into the digital production. So that's sort of what I have set up in my place. For more of the podcasting and interviews, you probably just want to go straight good quality preamp or good interface right into digital and keep it there, because digital is lossless. It's all zeros and ones, so it has an infinite noise floor, which means basically that even if you record too quietly, as long as there's not a lot of background noise in the space you've recorded, you can bring that sound up to a normal operating level to put on radio or whatever without bringing up noise from, say, like a tape machine would. So that's sort of your three choices there. So your analog, what I recommend typically is digital or digital hybrid, depending on whether it's more voice related or whether it's more music related. And then the next thing you go with that is your DAW, so your digital audio workstation. So it can be GarageBand, as you said. There's sort of really two ways of going, and they're interlinked to what I was saying earlier, is what your career is going to be. So if this is something you want to pursue seriously, go straight to Pro Tools. That's the industry standard across the board. If you're going to learn a DAW from scratch, go with the one that everyone uses. Now, the nice thing is all digital audio workstations can format things in a way that they will go to different studios, but typically 99.9% of every studio, especially if you're going to take your album, even if you're just taking the tracks, say that Oscar would record at home, you're going to dump those out as WAV files and send them off. If you can send them a project file that's in Pro Tools, that's what the mastering studio is going to use to make the final master for you, or to get a mix engineer to come and mix the thing properly for you, and so on and so forth. So if you're looking at serious stuff, go with Pro Tools. I don't know that I would recommend that for the podcast interview thing. Pro Tools can be pretty pricey. So there are lots of free programs like Reaper, and again, all the physical names for interfaces and anything I might put out there. I can make you a complete list later of what those things are. But there's lots of free software that works really well. So you guys could, for example, work on a DAW that is like Studio One has a free DAW. Luna from Universal Audio is a free DAW that has lots of features in it and is perfect and easy to work with. I tend to like Studio One a lot, and I find it's really great for editing projects too, because it has if you go with a professional level of it, not only does it have a complete multi-track recorder, but it has a mastering section where you can take your finalized tracks, you can make a digital release or a CD burn release or whatever, you can format it in all sorts of different ways for all sorts of different final destinations, and it brings in finalized stereo tracks, which you can then normalize so that they're all the same volume. You can still add compression and EQ or whatever you might have to do, so it's got a few extra wins in my opinion, and is not that expensive. And if you buy a new interface, if you buy some of the new PreSonus ones, for example, they come with a professional version of the software in there, so you get all that as a free add-on. So the other thing, it doesn't sound like anyone's doing it this way, but I will just point out because it says Pro Tools versus Live. So what I'm referring to there is Pro Tools versus Ableton Live. And they're just different formats. So it can be an interesting thing for a solo music person to put together, because the way Ableton and similar programs work is you can record in small chunks and store them in a library, and then you can just sort of drag them out on a grid. And it's kind of like an automated sequencer that allows you to pick and choose from things, as well as it has drum beats and effects and all this stuff. So a lot of home music people like it because it's something where they can loop continual drum beats, bass patterns, synthesizer patterns, and then they can record stuff over top of. They do work as a recording DAW, but I would say only go with the Live or the Bitwig version, that kind of live setup, if you're planning on doing that kind of chopped grid music creation, which doesn't really sound like anyone here is sort of putting towards. It's good to know every software you can, but not super important. There's definitely reasons I won't get into right now where Live is not as good as a DAW as, say, Pro Tools or Studio One is. So if you're thinking more just the recording a band, anything like that, stick with your Pro Tools or your Studio One or whatever software sort of suits your needs. If I'm going too fast, or if you have questions too, feel free to ask, but like I said, this will only be a few more minutes to get through this whole list, and then we'll just open it up to questions and try and get through to everyone's questions about all these topics. So this is what I call part two. So that sort of first thing covers all the kind of gear. So we've got you got a rough idea, or it's a good idea to have a rough idea of how much money you have to spend on this. That can be like a one-time deal. It's something where you can afford $200 a month to put towards buying new gear or whatever it is you need to do. And of course, as well, never hesitate to go with used gear and things like that. Kijiji, you can pick up great deals. Again, you can buy stuff brand new for a pretty reasonable price. You can find great deals, as I have, on Kijiji and Facebook groups and things like that too. So on to the studio part then. The studio part, there's sort of three, or acoustics we'll call it. There's three sort of things to look at. First off is picking your space. And that's sort of subdivides into home studio or mobile studio. So there are two choices you have to make. If we see the room here, which is approximately 30 feet by 30 feet, that's not great in terms of the fact that it's a square. So there's lines of there's physical lines in a building. So has anyone been to the Bader Center, to the main auditorium there to see a show? So that place is my favorite place on earth. It is acoustically brilliant, and it cost millions of dollars to design that. All those odd wavy lines on the walls, the fact that the wood doesn't look even, there's different sizes and chunks, and the overall space is very odd, bizarre, trapezoidal, whatever, rhombus kind of thing going on there. That's all designed in a computer or by architects who know how to build this stuff. That's all done for the acoustics. That's why you can hear a pin drop on stage, and why you can hear an orchestra up there and hear every note that everyone is playing, no matter where you sit in that room. So this space, I can tell by sitting in here, is actually a pretty good space, because this is semi-basement, it's carpeted, it's got lots of uneven shapes around you, so all these record shelves, CD shelves, these are the kind of things you can do for free with your own furniture in your house. You can move a bookshelf in, move a couch into a space, all those things that break up the lines, is what you don't want to have is what they call standing waves. And it's basically, as I talk, and my voice travels to that back wall, it hits that back wall, and it comes back quieter to my ears. And that's what they call reverb. That's, as we're all aware, that's the sound of the echo and when you go to Grant Hall, for example, and you know what that sounds like, it's horrible. You clap your hands and you hear 5 seconds of reverb coming after you. So this is actually quite a nice space. You could record in this area pretty well. It would be worse if all these bookshelves and things weren't on the walls, because you have more flat spaces. So you want to have oddball spaces. If you have a room that's a little, generally in a house, that comes down to having a room that's longer than it is wide, or one of those two things. So figuring out that kind of space, and this is more, again, attuned to you three, which is more about recording bands. That's much more important, and having a big space too is better. So this is where you start thinking, what I probably recommend to people to think about for doing a home studio for recording bands, because you probably are going to be limited to space, is to have, if you can have a room this size, that's great. This is actually a decent size, 30 by 30 feet, and about a 10-foot ceiling. It's not a bad space, and with all these little things you can do, and there's other things you can do to make your space sound better, that's a good place where you could put a drum kit in. You could put even, 30 by 30, you can put a small band in there. If you had something larger, it might get, things are stepping on top of each other. But then if you need a space to record like a whole big band, and you want to have monitors in the room, things that are going to get loud, going and finding a space you can rent can often work. So for me, the space I've always wanted to record in, and someday I will, is Glen Burnie United Church. They have a large room that's about 75 by 40 or 50 feet. And it's got big 20-ish foot ceilings, but they spent the money in this space and put in ceiling baffles that really turn it into a really nice space where it doesn't have a massive reverb that you would expect. And they've got an actual church which is untreated in the side next to it that you could run out an analog style reverb room into. Very cool place. So just to try and shorten this up, you've got the choice of doing the home studio. The bigger the space you can get, the better. It's less important for you guys doing the podcasts or interviews or voiceover work, because you're trying to isolate the voice. So having a big space can be sometimes detrimental. This space, again, you can, it's totally dead in here. This space would actually work really well for recording. The other part of it, which we'll come to on my next page, I believe, has to do with external stuff. But just a consideration to have, look at outside spaces that you can rent. And that can also be for recording, if you're doing something that's like, say, Oscar, you get to, you've recorded everything in your house, you've got a good sound on that, but you want to do the vocals, your basement is, say, a little reverby. You really want to have a dry vocal. Renting out Zane's studio north of Princess there to do some planned sessions is a good way of finishing things and adding into the project. Same thing for you guys doing interviews and that. If you have something that's actually going to end up in a film, budget in for renting a good studio space. Zane's is one place. There's Duncan's place out in the township, and places like that you could go as well. So thinking about expanding outside of your own personal studio is never a bad idea. But having a nice little space, we'll get into the acoustic treatment of that next. So, home studio acoustics, again, room choice. It's the size and the shape and your orientation in it. So ideally you want as big a room as you can get away with. You want uneven surfaces, so if you have a square like we're in right now, we all heard it's a pretty dry sounding space. That's a lot to do with all the weird shapes. even those speakers hanging up on the back wall, all those little things break up all the sound reflecting all over the place. Orientation, it doesn't much matter, I guess, in a sense. You just want to avoid corners. So corners are where sound really builds up and becomes problematic. And if you have, for example, a studio where you got your speakers and you're going to sit and you're going to mix a band from, you want to have your speakers pointing on the short side. So imagine this room was a squished down rectangle. We would have the speakers at one end firing down the long end. And not, sorry, I said that backwards, I realize now. You want them actually going down so there's a bit of distance, and it's the shorter from the left on the right, and the front to back is longer. Most professional recording studios, their control rooms are either massive, so things like that aren't a consideration, but if they're smaller ones, they're always longer rectangles. The speakers are at the small, short wall firing down the long wall. It makes a difference to how you hear sound, and it reduces some of your issues with reflections and things like that. And then we'll go quickly into physical treatment versus virtual treatment. So for the interviewers, I'm going to say less, you want to get something of a good acoustic space, but you can probably get away with using plugins that aren't necessarily that expensive. I have a couple in mind specifically that have blown my mind every time I've tried them. They use AI supposedly, or whatever fancy software that essentially can get rid of all your excess room noise for vocals. There's one in particular designed for vocals that blows my mind as how well it works. I had a record from the 1940s of a guy recorded. This was actually recorded straight to vinyl. It was in bad shape. It was just of pops and clicks. I threw it through the software, all gone. I could hear the guy's voice. It wasn't, the recording was not great, so it's, but you got rid of this amazing amount of background noise. So software can be a solution that saves you time and money if you don't quite have a perfect space. Waves is the company in question. They make one for vocals, and then they make one for sort of getting rid of reverb. The reverb one doesn't work as well. You're better to treat your room, but the one for cleaning up a vocal is just blows my mind every time I hear it. So, physical treatment, buying sound absorbing panels, or doing, as I said in this room here, putting lots of uneven surfaces, carpeting, things that will absorb frequencies is the way to go. You can build my own project studio. I didn't bother because it gets really expensive. I built my own sound baffles. I have a terrible room, it's really too small, but I built corner baffles, a ceiling baffle, front wall baffles, side baffles, a cloud over my head, and a back baffle with a few hours of my time and maybe $70, $100 worth of wood, if that, and $100 and some, maybe $200 worth of Roxol insulation, and then a staple gun and some fabric land, just whatever was on seconds and looked good. It's pretty simple to do that, and I can give you websites and so forth that have designs and things like that. As I was saying, just to finish off on the acoustics, street noise, apartment or building noise, and mechanical noise. These are all external things that you have to really think about. Right now, the only thing we can hear in there is the board from the projector. And you hear this paper. And I can hear something, whether it's a pipe clunking along or people walking upstairs or something. Yeah. Those are things, if you're recording with a microphone, microphones record everything. So you have to, there's a signal to noise ratio, which you do by having your mouth really close to a microphone if you're recording that. But if you're playing an acoustic guitar and really silently and you've got all that kind of noise, that microphone is 100% going to pick it up. So judging, just sitting and listening to your space. Do you have a lot of traffic that drives by? Do you have an HVAC? If you do, you can hopefully turn it off while you're recording. Things like that are very crucial things to think of. That I've had customers come to me, buy microphones, and then get really upset the fact that you can hear cars clearly driving by. I'm like, yeah, you can't have a room that's noisy. The microphone will get every single detail of that. And you can use software to fix a lot of it, but these are considerations as well. Getting a place that is as quiet as possible is the best way to go. And people do it in their houses. There's some crazy studios that I've seen that are in people's houses that are putting out albums, and yeah, we can go into that another time. So that's sort of all your considerations for a room, crammed at you very fast. So careers in audio was the last part of this. My first question was, where do you want to live? And that was just to sort of say that you need to figure out what you want to do. If you want to be an audio engineer, mix engineer, whatever it is, certain jobs you can do. Your podcasting folks, you can make a career for yourself anywhere. Because it's something that can be done online. You're just sending a vocal file. If you can record it well somewhere, you're great. If you want to be a mix engineer or a mastering engineer or a producer or something like that, you've got to get used to the fact that you're leaving Kingston. You're going to go to Toronto at the minimum. Vancouver will be better for that. LA is probably your best bet if you really want to make a decent career in it. And it's a hard one too. It's not an easy one. So my choices in the matter were staying local. I've had opportunities and could have made opportunities for myself to go to a company in Toronto and get a gig, touring with a big band or something like that. I found a revenue income that works for me in town, having shows that are going on here. It's not the same thing, but it's a career choice. So that's part of all the decisions. So careers, as I said, there's mix engineer, recording engineer, post-production engineer, mastering engineer, producer, business owner, or the talent. So we've got a little bit of all of that in here. I won't spend long on that because that's just sort of, choices to figure out how to do it. The last couple things here, and then I'll get to questions. You've got three main paths, which are an unpaid internship, and we're going to come back to that one because that's how the whole industry really works to start with. School, or I called it freebasing, which is basically just doing, say, what I did, which is going into business for yourself. Whether that's owning a studio, whether that's owning a company, being the talent, like I said, whatever it is. Those are your three sort of ways to go. Now I come back to this next section, which kind of ties back into what I just said. Mentorship is one of the best things you can do. Find people that do the stuff and get them, whether it's a paid thing, there are paid ones out there, and then there are your friends and other people that are happy to offer advice and things like that. So that is always going to be the best way to do it. Getting out and actually doing the work rather than reading books and all that. School's a little different. I do believe in an education if you can afford it and if it's the career path you want to take. But there's a lot of paths that I would say there's no point in going to school for that. You're going to be better to go get a practical job. And then I come back to unpaid internship because even if you go to school, the first job you're going to have is at a studio as an unpaid intern. So it's a long and rocky and not very profitable road. You're going to need other things to do in there. But that's how studios work. That's how the whole industry sort of start off in, really. And then I marked in there shadowing as well, which is just, say, coming to a show that I'm mixing and saying like, hey, I'm trying to learn how to use a digital console. Can I just shadow, stand behind you, see what you're doing, maybe ask a couple questions at the end of the show? Some people are going to be, great, let's do that. Other people are going to be like, no, go away, but that's a great way to do it. And then, yes, mentor, unpaid internship. I guess I'm kind of getting a little off on how I planned with that. This is sort of, so there are digital ways of doing it too, I guess is what I was going with this last slide. So the personal mentorship, as I said, great thing to do. I had the opportunity recently, it was not a free thing, but I hung out with Eddie Kramer for 3 days and mixed a band with him and a bunch of other people. It was a paid for thing by a company called Sound Advice. So this is, you can't beat hanging out with a guy that recorded Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and learning his mic techniques and learning how he puts something together and then watching him in the studio, because basically that's what it was. He sat there, we need a little more of this. Now what I think about this, and he'd talk, but he's just basically watching a master of this thing go through his skills. And again, that's the same thing where you've got local studios, you've got online stuff, things like Mix with the Masters and Sound Advice, which are companies that offer live opportunities to hang out with the top industry professionals in the world, as well as a lot of videos and things like that. I can sort of go through when you'd want to do that at some point too. And then the last one is mixed training. There's lots of online people that I can recommend that will it's same with Mix with the Masters as a website. You can submit tracks to them, and you pay somebody to say like, okay, here's what you have, here's what's good, here's what needs improvement, and you're getting a time for not necessarily a lot of money. Eddie Kramer, for example, is on that Sound Advice program. You can send him a tracking, I think, get like a consult on it for a couple $100. And there's other people that his business partner is about $75. Obviously, you pay a lot more for someone like him, but there are people that are out there that will help you do things, including the one that the last one is actually Mixed Training, is a guy that does it out of the States who's really good. He's worked with lots of people, and he has lots of offerings in terms of you can send him a track and he'll just critique it and tell you what to change or what avenues you can pursue. He will do a one-on-one session and he'll mix the thing with you from scratch, teaching you all the way. So there's lots of ways to learn that stuff. And that basically comes down to my very last thing, which we'll just get into in the questions because I think I've already talked far too long, which is the online content warning. There's lots of also great stuff you can get from podcasts and YouTube videos. My only thing, and tied in with the gas rabbit hole, gas being gear acquisition syndrome, is that it's easy, especially, probably not so much for the guys doing the podcast thing. People doing studio work, it's very easy, I know, because I've spent too much money doing it. Buying cool preamps and processing gear and stuff like that, and you don't have to follow that route. In fact, I would say just sort of always be wary. And the fact that if you're listening to podcasts and online stuff, they're quite often supporting an industry that's just trying to sell you crap. So try and keep it simple and try and strip things down to your minimum. You can, if you've got lots of money sitting around doing nothing, go for it, have fun. If you're struggling on a budget, especially when you're trying to start a career or get your home studio doing or whatever, there's lots of cheap and easy and free or low cost ways of doing things. So that's basically me rambling for, what did I do? Oh, I went far longer than I thought. So yeah, hopefully Douglas, you have to leave first. So first off, anyone, do you have any general questions, anything like that?
I did one quick comment.
Yep.
You can tell me later about whether or not. The external considerations, I have a beagle in our house. Have you
I
heard-
know what that
have-
sounds like.
Yeah.
My sister has
When
a
I
macaw
wanted
and two other
to
birds.
do its sound,
Mhm.
because my co-host here wants it for our show,
Okay.
I can't get that dog to make a sound.
Well, first off, it's not a dog.
No, she's part of our house, yeah.
Yeah. No, I understand that could be a problematic thing to actually have in a recording studio because I know they're insanely loud.
Mhm.
They call out from, miles around. I don't know that I have any offerings to give you on how to make an eagle make a cawing noise or whatever. Patience. Setting up an always on, kind of like, they have camera traps for recording
okay.
nature documentaries. I'm sure you get, because again, digital, the great thing is there's no media cost. If you were doing a tape machine and running it for 4 or 5 days straight, A, you'd have to be changing it every hour, and B, you'd be recording over thousands and thousands of dollars of gear.
I have
You
one
can-
of those at home. Well,
Yeah.
not that, but
But you can set up a microphone in a room and just let it go. You can go home or you can go off to work in the day, leave the mic running, your DAW will record for hours and hours on end, and there's no cost whatsoever. There's just a lot of moderately annoying editing to do afterwards because you've got to bring 12 hours of audio into this thing.
You gotta listen to it
See
all.
what you're noise. Well, you can look at the waveform so you
Yeah.
can see it
Yeah.
more easily. Zoom in on that and then chop it down if it's something useful.
So what's the software you're suggesting for audio only?
I would say, again, for the podcasting folks, and I'll just sort of label you as that for sake of time, for those people, I'm going to say something like Luna. So I can make a
It's
list
just-
of these and
No,
make sure everyone gets a copy of it so that they know the specific things. Free software or the really inexpensive software is all you need. Reaper is another one that a lot of people use. Studio One used to have a free version. I think they still have a free version. It's cheap and easy software. You learn how to use it once. That's one good thing YouTube is amazing for, is that every company now puts their manual out in YouTube form. So you can sit and watch videos. You type it in. If you don't find one from the manufacturer. You can find one from some guy who's like, oh yeah, I wanted to know how to do this, and therefore we've got a way to edit an Eagle out of 12 hours of audio recording. But yeah, I would just say stick with the free stuff. It works just as well. And there was a big kerfluffle recently. A big name producer said Pro Tools, depending on which meter you use, the physical meter that shows you levels, changes the sound of the software, and it's complete utter baloney, because that just can't happen. It's zeros and ones. And I know there's a whole bunch of math that you could argue. I think he was trying to argue went on and supported that, but I'd say it's pretty much bunk. Doesn't matter. The most important thing when doing a studio, I would say, is getting it right on the way in. So spend a little more on your interface if you're doing this seriously or professionally. Spend a little bit more on a microphone and the software to correct for vocals or whatever it is. Garbage in, garbage out, as they say. So if you get a really good sounding take, there's less work you have to do with it later on down the road to make it turn into a $1 million podcast or a $1 million album or whatever the case may be. So yeah, don't worry about the software, because digital software is digital software. It's zeros and ones. Do not ever get taken in by the fact that people will say if you buy this $300 USB cable, you get a cleaner signal coming through. It's utter BS. It's a 0 and it's a 1. It works or it does not work. If the cable is broken, you will not get a signal going through. If the cable works, you'll get the exact same signal, whether you're at Air Studios in London or whether you're in your basement. So yeah, don't worry about the software side of it. Get a decent quality microphone, and again, that doesn't have to be thousands of dollars. You can spend a few $100s and get a really nice sounding microphone for a lot of applications. Probably for you guys, a broadcast style mic, a Rode Podcaster, like the mics you talk into in there, which are a more expensive version. It's the EVRE20. That's that long cylindrical mic that's end address, which is it's a good mic for studio recording as well, just because it's got a very nice kind of rich sound to it. You can isolate it pretty well, and you can get right on top of it, and it's got lots of filtering in it so that you don't get as many plosives going through it, so you can actually record videos or audio or whatever it is quite well. Cheapest one you can buy is probably, I think, the Rode Procaster. Again, off the top of my head, and then you can go up into thousands of dollars past that. But good quality mic, a good preamp, so that can be from the interface. The preamps in even the cheapest of interfaces are really quite good. You spend, either figure out, get a cheaper digital converter and a nicer preamp is the ideal way to go, but it's more expensive. If you just get rid of that preamp section and go with a little bit better quality preamp, the ones that I've been really happy with in terms of the mic preamp is just a trickle down design from their $100,000 consoles. It's Audient. They make the ID series of preamp interfaces that have really good signal to noise ratios on the preamps themselves, and are just good quality clean preamps and do a good job. They also have a DI in it, which is handy for the home recording studio in terms of you got a good quality plug-in for your guitar directly, your bass or your electric, or even your Quad Cortex amp simulator or whatever it happens to be. So does that make sense for what you're saying?
That's good.
Anything else? And again, remember, I'll give you all my email later, so if you've got follow-up questions with any of this stuff.
Now?
Yeah, Rob, R-O-B, at ksound, so it's the letter K with the word sound, singular after it, .ca.
Great.
Yeah, ask any questions you want. And I'll, like I said, I will put together an actual list of recommended websites for, like, Mix with the Masters, or places to, or what kind of gear list that because I've sold this stuff for a long time too. So I've seen what comes back broken after 6 months or a year, and seen stuff that I never see again because it works, and that's all there is to it. So any other questions for you, seeing as I know you probably have to go soonish?
I should probably go now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other?
Nope, that's good.
Okay,
And
so-
I've got to contact.
Yep, contact me there.
I
I'll
gotta go
make
back
up
and
a
listen to my
custom
room
list for you
first.
of things to look at, how to set your room up. Yeah, so anyone else, do we want to stick on podcast stuff for a bit in terms, or like small room or acoustics, or what do you guys want to talk about? Like ask questions about? Anything pop into mind? Oscar, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, like I have
What?
questions that aren't podcast related.
Alright, well, we'll cover the whole gambit here, so go ahead.
So, like, I guess what I need to figure out is, like, what gear to buy and what gear to rent.
Yep.
So, like, I mean, I would love to go to, like, just a full-on pro studio and record an album, but, like, I want to get it professionally mixed, too, and
Yeah.
all this stuff, so, it, like, I'm sort of budget makes sense to do it at home, and sort of gamble with the street noise and screaming people downtown
Yeah.
on Montreal Street and all that fun stuff. I guess so. Like, I want to buy like enough headphones and like headphone amps for
Yep.
people, because that's something that like I'll use again for sure.
Yes.
But then like in terms of preamps, like what should I like? I feel like I would rent like preamps for some stuff. I would think.
Yeah,
right? Like,
so do you know how many things you want to record at once? Like all live on the floor? Is it going to be full band or?
It's drum set. It would be piano, drum set, upright bass, saxophone.
Okay. So not to toot my own business there, but I actually have some high-end gear for rent. So I'm a
Okay.
Rupert Neve dealer. So I've got some nice high-end preamps, some nice compressors and things like that. So if you're looking for the final sessions, one thing that I'll come to, again, it's less important to the people doing the podcast stuff. More important for the people doing the studio stuff is I cannot stress how much of an important thing is of what is actually termed as pre-production. So yeah, I mentioned that as, I took that as a general term for the studio. So pre-production means back in the day of the Beatles, well, they didn't need pre-production because they played every night for 8 hours a day. They were tight as a band because they practiced and they played gigs and they played gigs and they played gigs, and that's why they could walk into a studio and kind of knock off the White Album in an afternoon more or less. And that's something that unfortunately gets more and more lost these days, I find. So I'm going to stress the importance of doing pre-production, which is getting your arrangements down. It's the musician talent side of it, more or less. It does apply to podcast stuff because, again, instead of just going in and recording something, do test run after test run after test run. Might become a little annoying and boring after a time, especially if you're just saying 10 lines over and over again. But then walk away from it for a day, come back to it and listen to what you did, and then get it up to a level that matches something you hear on a podcast that you download and go like, okay, I need more volume. You know, it's a practice thing. So really the best way to get good at all of this is by doing your Malcolm Gladwell. You get 10,000 hours in there and you're a professional at that point, or whatever it is. But the more practice, the more you put into it, the better you get. So the first thing to do, I would say, is pre-production. You don't, for that, for your case, Oscar, I would say figure out, it sounds like, because, you know, you're not going to probably put out an album every month, so you wouldn't need to buy, you know, tons of gear or rent gear all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Get a multi-channel interface that's got 8 decent quality preamps so that you can play with even your basic microphones, a bunch of 57s, like something really simple, move them around, practice in the room, like, okay, here's how they used to do it was, sorry, let's mute this. How they used to do it was they'd have people moving you around in a studio, like, so you would have people that would know, here comes the saxophone player, he's going to do a solo, someone would grab him by the shoulders, move him towards the mic, he'd play the solo, and they would pull them back. And they would set up things in the room. Microphones in the day, there were a lot of ribbon microphones, which have what they call a figure 8 pattern. So that means it's 2 capsules left and right. One picks up the sound on the left, one picks up the sound on the right. In between them, there's kind of a null space. So if you position that mic around and put 2 people on either side of it, and then put the drum kit in the null space, you don't get a lot of drum bleed through that microphone, but you get a good sound off of either side of 2 people playing live in the room. So mic technique, if you go to McGill or anything like that, you will find that you spend the first year not doing anything on a DAW, not doing anything on a mixing console. You're sitting there moving microphones around and listening to what the difference is.
So that sort of leads into my next question about
Yep.
like baffling and bleed.
Yes.
So like, obviously like having good mic technique is crucial, but like I have a few different options in my my house. Like there's it's sort of like rectangular, long rectangular,
Yeah.
and the back kitchen is separated between like a door and a wall, so there's pretty decent isolation there, and then it's a pretty wide open space between the like music room and then the living room.
Yep.
But there is like, you know, lots of uneven walls and lots of things, so I think it's good in that sense. But essentially there's the one main music room that has the piano in it, and then I need to figure out a space for the drums to go, because right now the drums are right next to the piano just for like rehearsals or whatever, but I probably won't record the drums right next to the piano. So I could put the drums in the living room. Other options are drums in the kitchen, or it's like a really old house, so there's weirdly kind of big holes that used to be for like wood fire, heat in the house in the floors. So I theoretically could run cables upstairs too for isolation.
Yeah.
I guess it's just like the thing I'm sort of wondering is like, should I try to just isolate things as much as I can physically, or should I try to like really dive into like mic technique and the like proper microphones, or like a bit of both maybe? Or
I say a bit of both. Is it going to be? Are you going to do vocals?
no.
Okay, so it's all instrumental.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that I would do it the way they would have done it back in the day, which is all live off the floor, with microphones, and the other thing to add to it is gobos,
Okay.
which is basically a portable baffle.
Right.
And again, something you can make yourself, and something that will improve the sound in the room regardless. Even if you don't have it between the drum kit and the piano,
Yeah.
you have it off against a wall, it's going to absorb some of the reflective sounds.
Right.
So building them is not something that's going to be, it's like I said, it's not overly difficult. You're basically buying, I bought 6-inch, 6 by quarter inch pieces of flat wood, made a box frame, like a sandbox frame.
Right.
And then you pack it with rock solid insulation, and you take a staple gun. Mine, I only did one main side and the anything visible, because I was all going against the wall. Gobo's the difference. There's a little different design you can do, so you have the wood showing on the outside, and then you put the material on the inside, and therefore it's sort of two-sided that way.
Right.
So I think, because I know you as a musician too, like, I'm going to say that you're going to get the best results by being in the room, listening to the other musicians, playing it live in there, not even worrying about headphones or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, get the sound in the room sounding good physically. And again, this is the whole pre-production thing. So set the piano up where it sounds good.
Right.
Move the drum kit around. The drum kit ideally is the one where you do want to put some baffling in between.
For sure.
You want to try and cut down, you're not going to, but you want to cut down some of the direct bleed. And baffling microphones is the other way to do. So you can get the individual ones. I have one down at the shop you're welcome to try. That's sort of it's a nice portable vocal booth. This would be something that you guys might want to consider too for podcasting if you don't have a good space. So the bad part of the sound is not the direct. If the mic is 6 inches in front of my mouth, I'm talking into it, that sound is good. The sound that's going to make your sound worse is going past that, hitting the brick walls or the drywall, which is worse, coming back in as reverb into the microphone. So I have one of the, what are they? It's not
Isolation
Aston, I think is the make of it. It's a big purple thing. It's a foam thing that holds the microphone in there, and it stops noise from coming around. Now, like I said, a car driving by, your microphone is going to pick that up. There's some very famous recordings, Led Zeppelin included. There's one where there's a phone ringing in the background. You can hear it in a couple of the pauses of the drums. There's all sorts of stuff like that where, a dog walks in. I think that was the legend of how Black Dog got named or something. A dog walked into the studio, or anyway, stuff like that happens. But I think is it really traditional jazz you're doing?
Probably more like maybe modern or whatever. I don't know. Definitely like just
electric amp or
no, all acoustic.
Yeah. I would think for all acoustic, spending the time making it sound good in the space, so investing in buying some baffling.
Yeah.
Again, making your own is pretty easy. Even blankets, packing blankets, things like that, hung up on walls. You don't want to
Right.
deaden the room down to nothing, because you probably want a little nice ambience. And in fact,
Yeah.
when you mic it, I'm going to recommend you have some room mics.
Yeah.
You want mics that you can either have as its own built-in reverb, basically. And usually the technique is you smash it with a compressor,
Right.
and just totally slam it down, even distort it. And then you just eke them in very quietly in the mix, but it adds this sense of space, and it adds this sense of reverb, natural reverb, to what you're doing, and it's perfectly in time,
Yeah.
because it was recorded at the time you did everything.
Right. Right.
So yeah, so it's not just that, but it's the dynamics of the players too that you get to work, so that the bass player isn't really digging into the strings and clacking or whatever if it's not called for, to compete with the volume of the piano player, trying to get the piano player to play a little bit quieter. And as you know, playing in a band, that's that whole dynamic range, and trying to capture that would be the way I would do it.
Yeah.
I think that would be, you could make a great sound with a combination of close miking and room mics. There's, I think it's the 3-to-1 rule, it's been a while, where it's basically if you have a microphone at a source, you have to distance out your next microphone at a 3-to-1 ratio, so you don't have
Right.
phase interference between things, or you have a phase interference, but it's been diluted by the space in between them. I'll look it up and
Yeah.
let you know whatever that is. But yeah, mic placement, working on pre-production, rehearsing those pieces that you're going to do over and over again,
Yeah.
and then taking a break and coming back to it and stuff like that, and then record all your tests. Like, that's the thing where if you have a multi, like an 8-channel interface, pretty sure you can get them as low as like $500 or $600.
Yeah.
With 8 decent quality mic pre's, and then you've probably got 2 or 3 mics you probably own, or you can buy a couple ones, buy a moderate condenser or something like that, and then when you get to the real deal, then come rent a few extra mics and say like,
Yeah.
okay, I need for this week, we're going to go and record it. We're going to get 10 channels of preamps. What I don't have, I know people around that I can probably dig up more preamps for you, so you can have everything recorded at a really high analog level,
Yeah.
and then kind of go from there. And you can still use the same interface. Even, what was it, PreSonus had one. They just released the newest version. I think it's only $600 or $700. It's now USB 3. It's still got super low latency, and they've put it up. I've heard the tests they did up against things that were like $10,000.
Right.
You can't hear a difference. They're,
Do you have some recommendations for like headphone monitoring? Because like I do really dig the like no headphones, all live off the floor.
yeah.
And I actually recorded an album at the end of last year in that kind of format. It was at the space in the library, and I got good results. But throughout the mixing process, I was sort of like, for my full length like album that'll be all my originals, I definitely want to have some isolation. Also with the space, there isn't really space for horns and the band.
Right.
So the horns will probably be either in the kitchen or upstairs.
Yep.
So yeah, I will need to get some level of headphone monitoring. I guess like in
Art
studios in the
and,
past, like there's the cool headphone amps that have like the controls on them for audio and whatnot, and I've never really looked into buying like that, so I don't even know how much they are.
Yeah, so you can do it all from so say you go with one of those cheap PreSonus things that has 8 pre's and super good quality for a cheap price point. It has analog outs. It's only going to have a certain amount of them.
Right.
But usually those ones have 8 outputs. So you could do 8 mono sends to 8 channels of headphone amplifiers for up to 8 people.
Right.
And it's all done digitally through its routing matrix and the software.
So you buy like one headphone amp, and then that headphone amp has 8 outputs?
Yeah, so the interface itself has 8 outputs.
Yeah.
And then you would buy 8 individual headphone amplifiers,
Yeah.
assuming that most people are going to want something of the same mix.
Yeah.
You could rent a digital mixer that's got lots of ins and outs on it, so everyone can go like, oh, I need a little more kick drum, I need a little more piano. And
Right.
they could all do their own individual headphone amplification that way. Usually the units that you buy or rent, I think I have one in stock at least at the moment, It's a stereo in and maybe a third auxiliary in, and then
Okay.
you can pick between 1 or 2 mixes out, and they will typically do 4 headphones at once. So
Okay.
you need a couple of those so that you, however many musicians you want, you just need an amplifier per musician,
Right.
and then ideally a way of sending a different mix to each and every one of them. But again, for studio, you know, I imagine the horn players are going to want to hear the drums well, hear the main rhythm instruments, so that they're, you know, clear on parts that they're adding on top of that.
For sure.
But yeah, that's essentially a headphone monitoring system. Probably a digital mixer is the nicest way to go, because you
Okay.
can have multiple outs,
Right.
like renting a little Midas or an X32 or whatever.
I'll talk to Jeff, because like Jeff Chown is probably gonna engineer the thing, and we'll probably do a combo of his gear and then rented gear and
Mhm.
then stuff that I end up buying, like
Yeah,
headphone
he could
amps
with
or
his
whatever.
little X32 box, and then you need something to amplify the headphones.
Yeah.
He could set up multiple mixes and adjust them, you know, fine tune them pretty easily.
Cool.
And yeah, so that's my recommendation. Take a lot of time screwing around, setting it up, listening to things, like even before you get Chown in.
Yeah.
Set up your interface, practice with the band there with miking from lots of different positions,
Yeah.
see what happened, and then go back and listen to them. Like
For
that's
sure.
the end of your pre-pro, is to sit back and have a beer at the end of the day or whatever, and listen to everything. Go, oh, I really like that. That sounds really cool when the bass and the piano are interacting this
Totally.
way, and then try to find ways to enhance and keep doing that thing, and then plan out, you know, what mic positions work best, and then you can swap out certain mics. You might find that some of your cheap mics give you the best results you can get, so keep those mics in the mix.
Right on.
Some of the best recordings you've heard have been recorded with 57.
Yeah.
It's scary but true. And some of them, Ken Clay is the one that always comes to mind. The first one I realized this with, his daughter was Colby Clay, I think, big pop star in the 90s or 2000s. And this is the guy that I think that the Beach Boys and a whole bunch of other stuff, like, had done a lot of big names. And for his daughter, he had this Shure KSM whatever $250 microphone. He said, my daughter's voice sounds good on this mic. All her albums are recorded on this cheap mic. They've got $10,000 Neumanns in the locker, but it's like, this thing works. This is the sound. So yeah, cheap mics I still think the preamp is the much more important thing. A really good quality preamp can make a cheap mic sound like gold.
Right.
And I've definitely heard that. I have a 58 is not my favorite mic. I don't like when people bring them for me doing live sound. I have an 8-channel Dante Rupert Neve preamp. When I put a 58 onto that, it sounds fantastic.
Right.
So, more questions?
What's a preamp?
Preamp is so everything in audio is a gain structure. Everything in the audio world is, my voice is putting a waveform out. It's moving the molecules in the air. That hits against the diaphragm of a microphone, which is a little thin piece of mylar, sputtered in gold or just mylar, depending on the type of mic, or ribbon mic, and it vibrates. From that, so as you can imagine, me talking like this is not producing a lot of energy coming off of a microphone. So it's a very, very low voltage.
Yeah.
It gets converted to an analog pod, just like electricity in the walls. It's a voltage in there that travels down the mic cable, goes into a preamp, and it's essentially like an amplifier, like your home stereo. So you plug in your iPod or whatever, as you're turning it up, you're turning up that gain, that volume control. So it's all just stages and stages of quiet volume from my voice to a microphone, to the quiet electrical out, and then the preamp is essentially, it's a knob on a control box or whatever that you bring up, and it makes everything get louder. And so that's another thing when you're setting up a studio, when you're learning the skill, is learning proper gain structure. Because if you take the preamp, if you have a room where somebody's this far away from the microphone talking quietly, you take the preamp and you crank it full tilt, what happens is you bring up all the electrical noise within that circuit. So now you don't have a very good sound because you can hear the voice, but you're picking up all the background noise. And like I said, you hear that sort of general hum that's in this room from whatever stuff is going on there, it'll pick up that as well. So all that stuff gets amplified. That's why mic technique is always good close, unless you're looking for an ambient sound. And the preamp is basically part of the gain structure that turns it into a usable signal when you go into GarageBand or whatever you're recording into. So, as I was saying, so if you're thinking, for example, of recording bands, if you have an you can do a lot with 8 channels. If the Beatles can make what they did with 4 channels and then keep overdubbing, digital is lossless overdubbing, so you can overdub for days. But 8 channels is tons and tons. In fact, I would say do it with less. There's some great albums out there that the drums were recorded with a single microphone. It's all about the technique, the player, the room, the compression, the processing afterwards. So getting something that's an interface with 8 inputs or even a 4-channel thing, you can record a drum kit overdub style with 4 mics very easily and get a really good sound. You need a kick mic, you need a snare mic, and then you need one of the many variants of overheads or underheads or recorder man style of doing 2 microphones to capture the rest of the kit. I've done it for live too. It's less is often more, because the more microphones you have, that 4-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio, whatever it is, where you have to have so much ratio distance between your microphones, because you'll otherwise have phase cancellation and weird things going on, which is a whole other lecture I could give for about 3 hours. I still wouldn't understand it at the end of it. It's complicated but simple at the same time. So if you have more microphones, you're creating more problems for yourself. So keeping it done with less microphones is always good. You just have to pick and choose the minimum amount to capture what you need to capture, and then figure out, okay, well now I'm up to 8 microphones and we're in a really tiny room. Maybe we should look at going into a bigger room where we can spread the microphones out to get that golden ratio between them and to make sure that we don't have these weird phase interactions. I've heard recordings that I did. I remember one Blue Martini, just recording the band live off the floor, and when I collapsed it to mono, the recording, when I listened to it in stereo, everything sounded fine. When I collapsed all my tracks to mono, the guitar literally disappeared from the mix. I could not hear it because there's a phase cancellation between the overhead and the drum mics and this down there. So when it was panned out and in stereo, you could hear everything fine. Put it to mono where all of those signals, because what happens is, if you think of a waveform, this is part of it. Here's the same waveform. If they're far away, they're not interacting with each other. As you bring them closer together, this one is chopping out sections. So this thing actually made a guitar amp disappear. I've never heard anything like that before. Just happenstance of where the mics were and the volume of everything. So that's again why you spend your 10,000 hours moving microphones around and learning to record and doing things like that. But yeah, preamp is basically just what gets the volume up to an acceptable level so that you can record. You do need a certain level. It's called unity typically. On a fader on a mixing console like this, it's up here where it says 0, and then there's this 0 line up here on the VU meter or on your digital meter. You're bringing that volume up so that it's averaging up at that 0. That means everything is running as optimally as it can, and you have small moves on the fader up and down make big moves in the overall sound. If you're moving the faders around, your volumes down here, you're going to have issues with having to gain it afterwards and things like that. So that's just part of the gain structure of the whole thing. Make sense?
Yeah.
Anything else on any subject with all things audio?
If you've got a window in the room, like, should you cover it with a piece of fabric or something, or is,
Windows are very reflective and very bright.
Yeah.
So deadening it down. Now, again, in this room, no, there's a window over there. You could take down those blinds and it wouldn't make a difference, because this room is big enough that sound is dissipating. And again, we've got all these lovely uneven surfaces in here, plus the carpet on the floor that's getting rid of any negative thing that window is going to do. If you took the microphone and put it in the window and talked facing the window, it would sound terrible. But out here in the middle of the room, and that's where I was saying corners are to be avoided. If you're going to build sound baffles for a room to make it sound better, your corners are always your first places to go. So you put your 4 corners of the walls there, floor to ceiling, then your corners that are ceiling to wall that are directly in front of you where you're sort of listening to your speakers, and then the corners that go all the way down the back, and then all the corners in the back wall. So fix the problems close to you first, but corners are your starting point, and then you build from there. You then go to baffling over your head and over your ears, and what they call mirror points of where the speakers are pointing. So the speaker is shooting sound over behind your ear by 5 feet, so you put a baffle over there, and you can get totally lost. There's, again, another rule that I don't quite remember. I think it's something between between 10 and 20%. 90% of what you get out of benefit to a room is by 10% of the actual coverage in there. And again, I can look up that specific number, but you basically want to cover a certain amount of space with baffles, and typically your corners, and then that makes 90% of the problems go away. And then as you add more stuff, you're taking off, maybe 90% is wrong, maybe it's taking 60% of your problem down, then you're only getting 65 by the next few panels you put up, and then you're getting up to 70 with a few more. And so, yeah, for Oscar's thing, that's what I would do. Go listen to the space, hear what the reverb is like. If it's kind of dead like this, you're probably pretty good not to worry about baffling things for wall reflections too much.
It's pretty dead.
Yeah.
It's more, yeah, I'm more worried about bleed and isolation and
Yeah,
stuff.
so gobos, which are basically panels that are free-floating, you can make them in all sorts of different ways. You can make them in sectional things, and there's probably there's probably people I can find that maybe would have some spares to rent or something like that.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering, like, I guess, like, my thing would be, like, either finding someone to make them for me, or just, like, renting or buying some, or, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because I know, like, most, like, a lot of gear stuff, like, if you actually go to the music website for the thing, it's going to be, like, really expensive.
Yeah.
Like, for example, like, a trumpet mute, like a plunger trumpet mute at Long and McQuaid is like $50.
Home Depot, it's
Home
about
Depot,
5 cents.
$5. Yeah, so it's like,
Yeah.
it's just one of those weird things.
Yeah, I would not recommend for most people spending money on expensive stuff. A vocal isolator, like I talked about, it's not a bad idea to spend a couple $100 maybe on one, because they can really do a lot with not having to do a lot of other stuff. And say you're doing it in your house, you don't want to take over your bathroom or your bedroom or your living room with putting ugly baffles everywhere. Something that's portable and works like that can be a great solution in terms of fixing the sound. And again, I would also say consider the software route for what you're doing.
And how do you really judge if one of those portable vocal booths is like, I always see them, I see certain ones online and people saying you gotta get this one, you gotta get that one, or ones that
Yeah.
are way out of the price point that people swear by. Like what is a good way, or maybe some good names to look out for things like that are effective?
There's two to buy.
Okay.
One is the SE Electronics
Okay,
version.
Okay.
The other one is the Aston Microphones version.
okay,
Those are the two that I've seen the science behind, and that I've used both of them. I know
Okay.
they work really well.
okay,
They go from moderate to pretty expensive. Like I think the Aston one's about $350 or so.
okay,
It's not out of this world, but if you
No.
consider the time and effort and the materials to baffle an entire room,
yeah,
it's a pretty good way to go.
oh, for sure.
And like I said, I have one at the store, so if you want to try it, just let me know, and you can. It sits on the mic stand. You put your mic in there, and you can just put it in, talk into a space that you're in, and then see if it makes a difference.
Okay.
So that's another thing I wanted to say about if you're thinking about getting into plugins and other gear, and sort of what I was saying with Oscar, like, you know, to buy a rack of 20 preamps is going to cost you $20,000-$30,000. So obviously rent. If you are some software, if you're going to use it all the time, buy it. Other things don't get sucked down the hole of like needing this and needing that, and that's why I was saying online content warning on that page. The whole industry, like a lot of the videos that people put out there are just, they get paid consideration from companies. They're not necessarily trying to deceive you or anything like that, but it is part of a repetitive cycle that I've been caught in and wish I'd pulled out of it a lot sooner, because I have a lot of software that I absolutely don't need. You know, I bought it all on sale or things like that, but if I was doing it now, I would never go to the subscription model, because I already own so much that I've paid for over time. But if you're just starting out and you want to, say you're going to record an album in August, Oscar, or that's when you're going to do the mix down, you're going to do it yourself, buy a subscription for a plugin company or a couple plugin companies, and just spend $60 and just rent it for August.
Yeah.
And you have their entire 10,000 plugin catalog there you can use, rather than buying all the stuff that you don't necessarily need. Especially the subscription thing, the great thing about it is you can start it and then stop it. They're usually start at about $10 a month, typically US. Some of them might be up to $20.
Yeah.
And you can, Waves or something like that, you can get so many tools for working that, and there's a ton of free stuff out there too, which I can recommend. But yeah, for that kind of thing, don't get sucked in on buying a bunch of stuff and rent when you can, just to save money. And the same thing, like I said, for the baffles, like your trumpet mute, it's the exact same thing for $5 at Home Depot. So get some friends to help build the stuff and or rent baffles. I don't know who would rent them. I know people that record in town, so they might have spare baffles
Yeah.
they don't use often, that if you had a date, you could work out something with them, and they could loan them to you or rent them to you or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I'll definitely look into that.
But yeah, I can put you in touch with a few people.
Cool.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a singer. Do you have any tips for recording vocals? Especially like with a lot of dynamic range.
Yep. The best, again, preamp is key. Whether you're renting, you can buy something decent to record with, and then for when you get to the point of needing to do an actual project where you want to say, whether it's still for hobby or not, but you're like, I've got some friends, we've written a bunch of music, we've got some tracks down, I want to release this as a free online thing. Rent a good preamp for a couple of, or a weekend even. Practice your stuff in advance so that you can do it in a few takes and get it right. But getting a good preamp makes a big difference, and at least a decent quality mic. Again, these are things you can rent. For doing it at home, again, try renting one of those portable booths to see if it does the thing. But I would say for singing, especially with a big dynamic range, maybe consider doing the baffle route and finding a space. You don't want to go too small. You can, go into a closet at home. But the problem with going too small, this is why the cheaper portable vocal booths don't work, is they deaden frequencies too much. And that will definitely happen in a really tight, small space. So air is actually really important. Space around it, you don't want too much. Like again, if we turned off the projector and there's a point when some of those mechanical noises stop, this would be a pretty good space to record in. Mic technique is the other thing you have to learn. So coming in close when you're going to sing quietly, moving in a little closer to the mic, and moving farther away when you sing loudly. Renting even a good compressor. So a compressor is a technique, it's a volume attenuator. So you set a ratio, here's your voice coming in, it's all good, it sounds great in the recording, but you really belt out a line, it goes up, it hits this threshold, and then this digitally or analogically pushes your vocal volume back so that it stays more consistent. Every recorded album you've ever heard has got tons and tons of compression on the vocals. There are certain higher end compressors especially that will help bring that vocal out. So you can, I always say garbage in, garbage out, get it done right the first way. So live tracking it with a compressor and just watching the reduction meter, pushing back just a little bit and listening to it and thinking like, okay, you can hear a compressor. When it comes on super heavy, if it's set wrong, you'll hear it kind of altering the sound. It sounds weird. But yeah, practice and a good mic technique, and then I would say the key thing is to get a good sounding space. So even if you record a little too quietly, you can then fix that after the fact. Try to get it right on the way in, but you can do a lot with a good analog compressor, or even there are a ton of good digital compressors that you can use in GarageBand to sort of help even those things out and and then automation is the other one. So DAW automation is the most mind-numbing, horrible thing I can ever think of doing. I can't stand it. I'm very old school. I'd rather have it recorded right the first way. But you can automate the faders to move up and down to make volume swells that don't sound like a compressor. But yeah, good mic, good pre, and a good recording space are your three biggest things, I think, in that. And again, pre-production. Be well practiced at what you're doing.
Are there certain instruments that you would say benefit more from from compression on the live side of things, like compression going into the recording?
I would say everything, really.
Yeah.
That's another thing that I've come across with a lot of people, and I kind of take that as a given thing, is committing to something. And again, that goes to the whole pre-production thing. If you don't have time, don't worry about it so much, because if you over compress something on the way in, or if you're trying to add saturation by distorting it and running that preamp a little hot, if you overdo it because you've only got an hour to go in and take a whole album, try to make it cleaner.
Yeah.
And do that stuff after the fact, because if you're recording digitally, you're going to have all that stuff that you can manipulate afterwards. But there's a very great magic to analog gear. That's why I have a hybrid setup in my house. I do everything digitally, but I run it out into compressors and EQs and things like that. Things that add character, things that add warmth and grit and sort of non-linear things that you don't get with digital, because digital sounds very harsh and cold on its own. So the analog stuff will make it. So the preamp is the big thing. Having enough gain on that you're driving the preamp maybe a little bit, if you've got the time especially to play with it. And then I would say if you can get a couple of good analog compressors, like old tube stuff or whatever it is, just, I would say put a little bit in there.
Right.
Like, again, listen to it. That's part of the pre-production thing, is playing with that compressor on there. So say you've got a week to record your album, get the microphones and compressors for 2 days extra, and have an extra day or two in the studio learning how to use them and playing into them and hearing what's it sound like when I crank the gain right to the top, what's it sound like when I have it at half volume and a lot of compression.
I guess like most hardware compressors would have multiple inputs, or
They're typically mono or stereo.
okay.
So you have to have one for everything that you do.
Yeah.
But yes, you're not really going to get a multi-in. You can repatch them
Right.
into different things depending what your setup is. Usually the easiest is physical. So you run something into the preamp, into the compressor, and then to your DAW recorder.
Right.
So yeah, the experimentation with that side of it and just having an extra couple of days to practice with it is the way to go. But if I was recording a whole band, I'd spend enough time with the band that I would be compressing and getting stuff in there. I've done that before, and it makes a difference. Like
Right.
I didn't have a lot of compressors. I had a bunch of good preamps when I recorded old band that I was in, but on the kick drum, I had that universal audio thing that had a preamp and then a compressor on the other side. I definitely just had it sort of moderately knocking at the kick drum the whole time, and it made the world of difference in the final result because it really kind of held the kick drum in place.
Cool.
Basically, you don't want to hear a compressor
Yeah.
unless you do, but
Well,
you're
especially in
ultimately
jazz, right?
yeah.
So
You want them there doing stuff. You want to see some level reduction on the meters, and as your ears become good, you'll hear what that is actually doing. But everything's compressed somewhere. Tube saturation is a form of compression, so distortion is compression. That's why people like cranking preamps and running hot signals through them, because not only does it distort it, you can distort very lightly and add saturation. It's a form of compression because it actually
Right.
knocks the top of the waveform off and holds certain frequencies in a certain place, and sort of brings out character that you wouldn't get otherwise. So yeah, just compressing everything. If you can get 20 compressors and 20 mics and do your whole thing that way, just as a random number, that's a great way to do it.
right.
And just have a few extra days to do it, because if you don't overdo it, you'll get benefits of sound and level consistency without, going over the top and finding that, oh, I can't use this snare. I've got to re-record a snare in a live recording because I over compressed it so much that it sounds terrible
Yeah.
no matter what I do.
Right.
And the other part of it is, which I can go into in greater detail anytime, is your attack release times are super important. So generally slow attack and fast release on a lot of things, anything percussive, because you want that transient to punch through and then you want the sustain to be controlled. And if you go the opposite way with a fast attack, it actually softens the sound of it. So if you want something to sound softer, you put a super fast attack and a longer release on it. And it sort of softens the leading edge of that note. So on a snare drum, it would make that sound not as cracky as your stick hits it or whatever.
So is the idea like per voice in the band is one compressor, or per instrument is one, or sorry, per microphone is
Per
one
microphone.
compressor? Right.
Yeah.
So even if there was like 4 mics on the drums, it would be 4 compressors.
Yeah. Unless you're doing what they call bus compression, whereas you're running those 4 mics into a stereo bus
Right.
and recording everything in stereo, which means you can't edit them afterwards. Then you would record all of them at the same time, which is sort of what you do more on the post-production side of it.
Right.
I take it you have to take
Yeah,
off?
I do, I have to leave. Thanks a lot
Okay.
for this.
I hope you got something out of it. As I said, I can make any of these points available. They should have my email, so they'll give it to you. And if you have any questions at all, just shoot me an email. Sometimes I get pretty busy, so it can take me a few days to get back to you. But if you've got any questions about anything, just fire away, and I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Awesome, thanks. Also, I just wanted to say I saw in the email that you might be doing a sound mixing basics workshop.
Yeah, I think we're in.
I just
That's
wanted
coming
to
up.
Express my interest in that if that's gonna.
Yeah, just talk to the CFRC folks. They will, I can't remember, I don't know, we haven't set a date for
We
that.
haven't
It's
set a date
next
for
month,
that
I think,
one.
sometime.
Yeah, I
Is the
think-
only plan.
I'll keep an eye
And I
on it.
think the idea is to go to the Broom Factory on a day when there's nothing going on, so there's a live stage, we can go through all the miking techniques and setup and so on and so forth. So yes, happy to have you there for that too.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Cool, likewise, have a good night.
One question I had, for, like, like software and it's, like, would you recommend a dedicated computer for software, or like, how much?
If you can,
Yeah.
but no.
Yeah.
Computers are so far, like my first real audio computer I bought 15, 20 years ago, whatever it was a company custom making this thing. Like, my iPhone is more powerful than
Yeah.
that thing was. That's only 15 years or whatever it's been, and that thing cost me at a dealer cost like $3,000 back in 90 something or the early 2000s, I guess it would have been. Yeah, the pricing is down. Like, I would say yes, if you could dedicate $500 to buy a laptop that's just going to do your audio, it gives you less headaches because it's not going to be, you set them up so that they're not checking your emails, so they're not downloading virus software. You set them to be basically like a air-gapped computer kind of thing. It's just going to be recording audio, and that's it. And therefore you don't have issues where if there's a software update, all of a sudden you've got to update 500 plugins and your software itself. If you can kind of close it off, this version of Windows or Mac OS works great, and it works great with this version of the software and this level of the plugins, and I'm never going to put it online and update a single thing because it works. That's the most solid approach to making a digital audio workstation. But yeah, not necessary.
Yeah.
You can run it on you can pretty much run it on your phone.
Yeah.
Your phone is powerful enough to record, hours and hours of multi-track recording. There are versions of Cubase, which is one of the more standard, like, pro audio DAWs. They have a version for an iPad that you can plug your Lightning or whatever into, and you can record multi-track stuff on an iPad. So computers have come a long way. They've so outstripped what the needs of audio are. So you can get pretty darn low latency on a cheap USB interface, and you can record 8 tracks or whatever at a time, and you can play back like unlimited tracks and mix them all on something that's not all that powerful. But not a bad idea if you can afford it, just to have something dedicated.
I'm just thinking of my, like, 6-year-old laptop and.
Yeah, 6 years old is not that bad
Yeah.
for something. My computers, I bought a refurbished Mac cheese grater at one point, trying to come up with my ultimate thing. The best audio computer you can get now is a Mac Mini. The stock model is killer. They'd be up to M3s now. There's $800 for a recording studio, like to do multi-track recording. I bought a slightly souped out M2, and it has no issues doing lots of tracks, doing lots of plug-in processing. There's certain upgrades if you want. The more you buy, the better it gets. But their out-of-the-box one off the shelf for $700 is just a killer computer. And that was from a few generations ago already. So, and Windows I always find just Windows in general is not as robust as Mac, so it's more prone to crash. But you can buy a decent laptop for $300 probably, and you can pick up used ones too. It used to be Simply Macs. I don't know if they're still around. Go used Mac Toronto or something like that, and you can pick up an old MacBook Pro for whatever. I bought a good, I needed a high quality laptop for work, but even still, I bought an M2 Pro a year out of date for like $800-900 off what it cost just a year before. But it was, I can't remember, found it on Best Buy Marketplace or something like that. Just, stellar deal for an almost top of the line new model with a super fast processor. So even picking up used is great.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if this is really a question for you or more like Lauren or whoever's like behind the CFRC like actual like recording like part of this whole thing, like I guess like what do you know, like are you part of the air part, like the live to air? Like I was told like part of it's being recorded.
I've done that before, and Jake, who works for me, has done some of that before. Not necessarily. I think they've hired people in to do that, so I've done that. I used to do that
the
on...
team comes, so I think Jesse is facilitating most of those recording periods, and then he anticipates who's going to come in from some of our part-time staff and that sort of thing to check it. It's usually not me, to be honest with you. I haven't been in this year.
Sure.
But I know enough around our studios in terms of control rooms and Studio A that I can do basic run-throughs and any questions about that kind of thing.
Do you know, I guess I'm not super aware, is the actual like radio part recorded, or is the like studio time that is before the radio part recorded?
I think you get some practice, as far as my understanding of the project goes, and I'd have to double check with Dinah and Jesse on this. You'll have some like non-recorded studio practice time that at least like you would be free to record it, because if you're in Studio A practicing, CR1 can't and won't be used, so you could use that control room to record your setup and figure out how you want it to sound ahead of time and that sort of thing. But my understanding is there will ultimately only be like one session which will go to broadcast, if that makes sense.
Cool.
Okay, cool.
And Dinah and Jesse would probably be the like people to
as far as I know, Dinah and Jesse, it might also probably, I mean, chances are tech manager, he's the guru around here, so he probably has a hand in it as well. I can raise it at the staffer if it's okay to get back to you with the email that was in the form.
Yeah,
okay,
totally.
Cool. Awesome.
Cool. Well, that concludes all my questions.
Okay.
Perfect. Tessa, you've been awful silent. You must have something you want to learn.
Maybe it's not like super technical question. It's more like, what would you recommend for an approach like finding like internships or mentorships, like somewhere, wherever, pretty much?
Well, for live, I mean, obviously, through Soundworks,
I
hired you to do stuff, but as well, like, anytime you want to come sit in on a show, I have to go over, so I did the Devon Cole show at the Brew Factory the other night, and I have to admit, there's certain things that made that show sound really good in terms of what they had working on stage, but I was also really impressed with watching how the guy had the board set up. I'm going to definitely go over and download his scene and study it. So working with any band on, it's Brew Factory especially has like touring guys coming in that are paid, that's what they do for a living. So you can learn some stuff. That's where I learned all my stuff, is just, I got in and did it, not having a clue what I was doing, because it was just at the shot bar with a powered mixer, and I was like, yeah, all right, let's plug it in, make it work. And then they started putting bigger shows in, so I just sat there and was like, oh, what do when the appropriate time is there, well, how come you doing that with a kick drum? Yeah. And things like that. So yeah, in terms of that, there's that kind of thing. So just going around to any live venue, because the principles, the format is so night and day to a studio, but the principles of gain structure, the principles of how a board works, and that kind of thing are identical. Other than that, I can make an introduction to Zane at North of Princess, or to Matt Bates out at, I guess that's another studio I didn't think of. There's people that have studios in town. How I did it originally when I first had an interest in this in high school, there used to be a place called Newland Studios north of Kingston. He got a grant to get this $250,000 mixing board that I don't know what it was. It was probably like an SSL, something I wouldn't know at that time. It was a really nice big modular recording board, and he had a 24-track recording thing, and he had post-production studios all throughout the place. And I never got to use the time because I didn't have a band or anything to do, but basically I traded time lifting boxes and moving stuff. There was me, Andy Love was another one I did that with. We went to high school together, and a couple other people. We just would go out for certain hours and we'd help him move boxes around. We stacked a lot of papers and did recycling and that's that whole paid unpaid internship
Yeah.
thing I talked about. You start as a gopher. Like if you look at if you watch the Sound City movie, everyone who started off, they highlight that in the film. This guy starts off as a runner, which is the guy going to get coffee,
Yeah.
and then he becomes like an assistant to the mix engineer. Then the next thing you know, there's like, yeah, okay, I gotta go do whatever. You mix this band. There's lots of stories of famous albums that were recorded by people that are like, yeah, I can't do this. You can do it. You know what you're doing. They just throw you on the board, and you've been watching, so you've learned. But that's how you learn, right? By going in and doing it. So yeah, talking to the studio guys, asking if you can just be an assistant, just to go move mics around, so you can sit in the studio with Zane or whatever. And he's like, we need to move the kick drum mic out. You run in the studio, move the kick drum mic out, and then you sit back and watch, and ask him questions on what he's doing and things like that. That's some of the most invaluable stuff. And then again, for the online stuff, it's not so much on the technical side of it. I find there are definitely some, but like Mix with the Masters. Save up, it's inexpensive, it's $300 US for a year. It's like $40 Canadian a month or something. So it's not ridiculous, it's a chunk of money, but you get their whole video library of all the most famous people you can imagine. You watch them sit there, and how their videos work is typically like Chad Blake is remixing, he just released a video on Mix with the Masters where he's remixing one of the first singles he did for Arctic Monkeys. And so he's now doing it. Oh, this is how I recall that I did it. He just walks through his process. Like, turn this up here. I like to do this with the drums, and it's more of a feel than it's an actual frequency or whatever it is. So
cool.
that kind of insight is great. And wait for Black Friday to come around.
Yeah.
Mix with the Masters, Pure Sound's the other one that has a lot of good stuff. They always have deals. Pure Sound is I would recommend too. They have like a half-year program, and it'll go on sale at Christmas or whenever, and it'll be, I don't know, it's maybe $150 Canadian or something for that time. And they have the same thing. They have big names doing stuff, but they also have things where they're like, okay, can you hear the compression on this track? Now, I've changed something. What have I changed? Can you hear this 1 decibel move at 6K? And there's ear training things and things like that. So that's all really good. But yeah, I would get your hands dirty is the best way to do it. And if you want me to recommend, I can make an intro to Zane or to Matt or to any of those people I know. Terry is another one. As a studio that might, be happy to have a lab assistant for the day or a week or a band or whatever it is. And then, just get in there and get your hands dirty and learn stuff.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, sure. I'll send you an email about it someday.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anything else? Any last minute stuff?
Have you ever engineered jazz? Like a record?
Not a record. I'd love to. I love acoustic stuff. I sort of did. I made an okay album with Robert Douglas and, what's his name? French guy on Wolf Island. Plays cello.
Oh, I don't know.
But yeah, it was Robert Douglas playing the Baby Grand from several years ago in the hotel. This is back when Mustafa owned it still.
Right.
Really tricky. That's where you learn. That's where I kind of learned live sound. I always think of live sound as combat engineering because you're dealing with.
That lounge is weird, eh?
Yeah, there was the air conditioner which we had to turn off
Right.
because it made a lot of noise. The piano keyboard they found, or the foot pedal, squeaked like crazy, so we couldn't use any mics under the piano. And we had the two of them in this tiny space. There was, it was interesting. It was an okay album I put together, and then I overdubbed Terry Frost there, did some bongos and percussion stuff on tracks.
Cool.
But yeah, I love doing acoustic stuff. That's why I like the Bader so much.
What was that church you mentioned?
Glen Burnie.
Glen Burnie Church.
There's the grocery store out there. It's just north on Division Street.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've ever been out. There's a butcher and a little grocery store.
Right.
And you go to the right, and it's halfway between Montreal Road and Division.
Right.
And it's a Glen Burnie United Church, I think. And yeah, it costs money, obviously, but I don't think it would be ridiculously expensive. I talked to them about it before, but you got to have somebody. For me, I don't have time to do projects all the time like that, so it's lining up people that have a little bit of money to spend on putting something together, whereas the home studio thing is sort of where most things are at now, so people don't want to spend the money necessarily. to go out, especially if they're just doing something for fun.
And they
But
they have a grand piano there?
they don't. They
Oh.
just have a good sounding couple of spaces.
Right.
I would like to record there because the church is untreated and drywall and huge, so it's like being at the Spire. It's one of
Cool.
those terrible reverb rooms. But to make at a reverb chamber, like stick a microphone out there, and then they'll have the doorway open, and have either the ambient sound coming through the hallway into there to microphone, or to do the traditional way of making a reverb chamber, bringing a speaker in there, sending a mix of whatever of a room mic in the dry room, sending that out to the reverb room, and then putting mics in different places in the reverb room to get natural reverb sounds. That's how all those studios did it. The reverb chambers at Capital City, where it was Capital City, I think, was an upstairs room with a short roof. They put speakers in there and then microphones that you move around to
Right.
get different sounds. That's basically what a reverb chamber is. There's a really cool video on YouTube, Eric Valentine getting the sound of the Queens of the Stone Age guitars.
Right.
It shows him how he recorded that stuff. He doesn't show their actual things, but he gives a sort of simulation of how he got reverb chamber sounds with 3 guitar, surf guitar sounds, in this case, with 3 mixed amplifiers in a room, and then mics in this little hollow concrete chamber that was in behind it.
Right.
And then blending them together, and he walks through, okay, here's the dry amp sound, here's this added to it, and stuff like that. That's why I say you got your room mics, because getting those and crushing them with a compressor and doing stuff like that is where you get really cool character, plus it's live in the room, and I also like things you